Obama and the search for hope and tragedy. The power of words is quite an amazing thing. With words, we can change a life, send people off to war, or inspire hope across the world. It's true what they say when they say the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword. No strike, no blow, any action can have the same effect, the same mark that words can from a simple speech or a pamphlet given out in the right hands. In January of 2011, in Phoenix, Arizona, a gunman came across Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and many of her constituents and opened fire. Many were injured, including Congresswoman Giffords, as well as 6 people dying within the situation. Here we have someone who decided to use his actions to make them speak louder than words. He tried to take away from us Congresswoman Giffords and her friends, the people who were trying to make some kind of change in the world. However, it was another man, President Barack Obama, who came in the aftermath. Instead of actions, used his words once again in attempts to change the world. Today we're going to take a look at a little bit of his speech, mainly looking at specifically the opening, the organization of the speech itself, and finally the closing. First we're going to look at the opening, and the opening is a very important part of the speech because it's what pulls people in. It's what allows us to basically see where things are going and see whether we want to be there or not, in a simple phrasing. While analyzing this, we're going to look at a form of analysis known as GATE. GATE stands for gain attention, arouse interest, tell them, and then finally engage them. Now some elements may fit into these categories more often than others, but nonetheless we're going to look at it through this perspective in order to get a more thorough concept of what's going on. So first of all, we have gain attention. With gain attention, basically what President Obama attempts to do within the speech itself is to address the families of the victims. He wants to come off as someone who is a common American, have some sense of commonality with these people who have suffered, though he may be a president himself. And he says certain things such as the quote here, as an American, connecting as an American, like all Americans, kneel to pray with you today and will stand by you tomorrow. It's a very important part of the speech because it allows the listeners, the audience, to feel like they are a part of the same level as President Obama is in this situation. Next we have arouse interest. And again, the biggest thing that President Obama does within his speech is uses his commonality with these people to try to arouse the interest of the crowd because it's what allows them to understand where he's coming from, or at least an attempt to make it sound like they understand where he's coming from. Next we have tell him. And once again, his connection with the crowd, with anyone who's listening, to anyone who's ever heard the speech or read it himself, is his way of attempting to tell them exactly where he's going with all this, to state his main purpose, which we'll come across later on within this analysis. Finally, we have engage them. And engage them was one of the more interesting aspects of the opening of the speech, because within the speech he tends to use a little bit of Bible scripture. And he does so to give it almost a deeper thought process within the speech, because people usually see the religious tools that we have available to us as a deeper sense of thinking. And he has a particular scripture in there that I like to read. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. This becomes really important because it gives it almost a better sense of where we can go from here, as religion tends to help us with after death or tragedy or any other situation of that nature. So next we're going to look at the organization of speech. Organization is very important because it's what allows the speaker to basically get out the information that they need in a particular order, to create a sense of understanding within the speech. And President Obama goes about the speech in a way that's called Finding Conclusions Recommendations, or FCR, as it can be said in shorthand. Basically with FCR, it's using information or past situations to create a plan or concept of future endeavors. And today we're going to take a little look at that for a second. So the facts of the FCR organization. Within the speech, President Obama talks about the victims, some of their past, and some of the present situations that they've been in, and what has happened with the tragedy itself. But then President Obama takes them to a little bit of a different direction. Basically, he starts looking at the shooter himself and the person that he was. And he never says anything within a negative sense. There's no point where he's trying to make the shooter sound like the worst person in the world, or someone who has created such a crime against humanity. But rather, he tries to stay away from all the negative emotions that could be evoked from such a situation. After all, this is a tragedy, and a tragedy is something that is not taken lightly. It's not something that is usually looked upon with any kind of positivity in any sense. And within this, he uses a couple of phrases, such as pointing fingers, which is somewhat of a common thing that people can say. Or finally, the usual play of politics and point scoring that drifts away in the news cycle. Finally, we come across the closing. And within the closing, it's just as important as the opening. Because with the closing, it allows the audience to have a sense of remembering what was said within the speech. It's what leaves them with the right sense of where the speaker was coming from with the speech. And President Obama basically goes about talking about Congresswoman Giffords as well as the other victims, and finishes up by talking about one or two people, and then finally leads to the connections with his opening. And then he basically states the main purpose of the speech, which is key aspect, as well as he is looking to get across a main point within all this. It's not just him talking about something that happened, it's him trying to teach almost a lesson to the world. So when looking at the closing, we have something very similar to the opening situation. It's called LAST. LAST basically stands for link to opening, assure the purpose, sending a clue, and finally tell. Now, when looking at the speech, it doesn't necessarily all fit into the same concepts as LAST would have you believe, but it still goes about the process in the correct way and does definitely what it needs to do, which is finish the speech on a high note. So we're going to look at the L, which stands for link to opening. So with the link to opening, basically President Obama mentions heaven, as well as some of the people who may be in heaven within the case of the victims. And basically this connects back to the beginning when there was religious scripture as well as a couple other religious concepts being said. And this connection basically creates more of a deeper analysis, as said at the beginning, a philosophy to the speech almost, because it's basically giving it more than just, oh, something happened. It's giving the speech a little more credibility, if you will. Next we have assure the purpose. And with assure the purpose, there was one particular victim that President Obama was talking about near the end, of the young lady named Christina. And when talking about Christina, President Obama has a little quote saying, "I want our democracy to be as good as Christina imagined it. All of us. We should do everything we can to make sure this country lives up to our children's expectations." Basically, the way I looked at that was that he was attempting to evoke the main purpose, which is we should not look at this tragedy as a dark moment in our past, but rather we should try to find peace and hope within what has happened, that we should look more forward to what situations will occur in the future and how we can try to better everything so this won't happen again. Send a clue was the section that I probably had hardest time with, because it was just simply that I didn't see many clues, but rather President Obama looking more towards stating the fact that he wants everyone to move forward. Again, the whole concept of living up to our children's expectations. It was, there was no real mystery to it. There was no real sense of trying to create a message other than moving forward. Finally, we have tell them. So with tell them, there was one more quote in the ending that said, "Here on earth, Here on this earth, we place our hands over our hearts, and we commit ourselves as Americans to forging a country that is forever worthy of our genteel, happy spirit. And again, this is President Obama looking more for the peace and the opportunity of having a better world after this situation. He's not looking for the negative aspects of this. He's not looking for the outlash or the hatred that may occur because of the situation. Rather, he just wants everyone to try to move along with life and try to hope for better things. Today we took a little look at the opening, the organization of the speech itself, and finally the closing of the speech that President Barack Obama gave back in January in Phoenix, Arizona. He basically tried to heal a nation that was affected by a severely tragic event, the shooting of Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and many of her constituents. Someone tried to take an action and make it more powerful than words, but President Obama appeared to come around and actually live up to the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword."